Welcome back to Spilling. I'm so excited to share this story with you guys today. Today's going to be part 1 of Kirsti and Annika's story. We're really going to be diving deep into Kirsti's side of things, and I can't wait to share it with you. Surprisingly, there are no trigger warnings for today's episode, but we will have a couple in part 2 of this story. So stay tuned for those, but you should be able to listen today fairly carefree. And I hope you get as much out of this as I did. It was so eye-opening for me, so inspiring, and I can't wait for you to listen. Just a couple of reminders before we dive in. We are now on YouTube, even though we don't have any video up yet. But if you do subscribe to anything on YouTube, go and subscribe to our channel there. We will eventually have video up. And make sure that you are subscribing or following wherever you're listening right now. It really does help us out so much. And if you can, take the time to leave a review. We really appreciate all of the listeners, all of the feedback we've been getting, and we just love the support you guys have given us so far. So thanks again. We love you so much. Now let's get to spilling. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Bailey.
Welcome back.
Here we are.
Here we are. I will say, I do love recording on Sundays because I get my fill in the morning.
Yes,
at
it does feel
church.
good.
It does. And then I'm like, okay, now we can come and do the spill.
Right.
And it's always great at church because Scott and Courtney go to my church. So I get to see them, but then I get to see all these other people I know. And I had a mom friend of mine, her sons are the cutest little boys, and she always has them dressed so cute. And her son was in my class last year, and he just moved up, and they were the sweetest boys. And she stopped by and she's like, hey, I wanted to let you know I've been listening to your podcast. Aww. And it's so good. You just have me like crying. And I cut my finger because I was crying and I couldn't see because she was crying. She's like, but it was good tears. I'm like, I love it. I love making people cry. But she was so sweet. She's like, keep telling the stories. I love it. People always tell me, I love seeing Scott and Courtney. Like, they love hearing their story. And I love that because a lot of times people are scared to share their story because they're worried about what people are going to think about them. Because Scott and Courtney, to everybody at church, are Scott and Courtney that go to church. Like, they never knew those things. But those things are so powerful. And when we truly... when we experience God ourselves, we know how much we need that too. Like, we need that redemption. And to hear of other people's wonderful redemption stories, I know for my church body, having Scott and Courtney in that, people hearing their story just makes them love them more. Just makes them more appreciative of what the Lord has done in those people's lives, and then it helps them reflect on what all that God has done in their lives. So I just love it. I love God. And so I'm like, I'm pumped. I'm ready to spill. Yeah. But this is a big one. Okay. I thought it was going in one. When I met these women, I thought this story was going to, I didn't know the whole thing. I knew bits and pieces, and I thought it was going to go in one direction. And then I started having these conversations with them, and it took me down a whole different path. So I love that. but we got to get into it. So today's story is about Kirsti and Annika. And I met them at a town festival thing. We have a thing in our town called Bergfest. And Annika sings, and she takes vocal lessons at our performing arts studio here in our town where my daughter dances. And so I've heard her sing at multiple festivals and fairs around our town before, but the past few times she started singing Christian worship songs. And at this Bergfest, which was just in October, after the podcast was public, I think at this point, we hadn't launched our first episode because it was October, but I was already working on episodes. And she sang at this event that my daughter was dancing at, and she's been singing Christian songs, and she chose to sing God is in the Story. That one that it goes, fear is not my future, you are, that song. And she dedicated it to the director of our performing arts studio who has been battling cancer. And then her aunt, who's actually her mom's best friend. It's not her biological aunt, but her mom's best friend. And her mom's best friend was there, but both of them going through cancer. And so she dedicated this song to them about fear is not my future, sickness is not my story. And so just really beautiful. And if you see Annika, you know that she has a story of her own because she is 15 years old. She's in 9th grade, so she's in freshman year of high school. And Annika is 4'8". So she's a tiny thing, but she is full of life, so full of life. And she just has such a presence on her already at such a young age. And so she definitely holds herself like a 15-year-old with lots of spirit and wisdom and sass. She's older than she looks, but she is very small. So you know she's got some sort of a medical journey or a genetic condition of some sort. That moved me so much, her singing. So I went up to her after and I talked to her and I was like, I just wanted to tell you, like, I was like crying when she was performing, and I just wanted to, like, I'm a praise and worship girl, so I wanted to stand up because that song has an echo in it where it goes, "Fear is not my future, you are," and I wanted to be like, you are, like I really wanted to just start going with her, but I chose not to do that, and I went up to her after, and I told her that it takes a lot of guts to sing in front of people, but even more guts to praise and worship in front of non-believers, and that she does a wonderful job. And I'm just really like to keep doing that and keep singing those praises for the Lord. And her mom came up towards the tail end of that and was like, give her a hug. She was just the sweetest little lady. And so they go on, and 15 minutes later, I'm still over there because my kids were still performing and stuff. And her mom finds me and comes back up to me, and I just needed to come talk to you. And I was like, yeah, I just really appreciate you saying what you said to her. Because she does have a gift and it's so special, but it's really great when people affirm her and encourage her in that, because it isn't easy. And I'm like, absolutely. She just has such a gift. I always enjoy hearing her sing. And it's just funny because anytime she sings or anytime she's behind a mic, something supernatural happens. And supernatural is the overall theme of my first season of this podcast that I've told you from the beginning. I almost named it Supernatural Witness. Like, supernatural was always a big part of it. So when she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, where is this lady going with this? And so she starts talking about all these experiences that Annika has had when she's sang, or famous people she's run into and that she shouldn't even be alive, and all these things. I'm like, whoa. What is this story that God is laying in my path here? And so I tell her, I'm like, so funny that you say supernatural, because I actually have a podcast that's all about God's supernatural interaction in our life. And I want to share her story. If she loves being on a mic, she should come to my basement. To my studio, and I would love to interview her. And she's like, okay. So this, started in October. So they came over and we had our interview, and Annika was adopted, and you can tell that her and her mom are not biologically related, but they are the sweetest mother-daughter duo. Like, I didn't even need to move my couches so they could sit on two couches. And when they came back, I ended up just having them sit on one, because they just sat right up, cuddled into each other, and so playful, so fun. And I'm like, gosh, I hope my girls at 15 want to snuggle with me on a couch. Yeah. And they're just so sweet. And Annika's sassy and she's spunky and she's so fun, but she's just so charismatic and personable. And so she just sat here and we talked, and she makes little jokes and very teenagey like type jokes, but still just so kind and so sweet. And they were just a joy to sit with. But I thought the story was going to be all Annika's life, like her story. But the more I started talking, the more I realized how much really her mom, Kirsti, her story is what this podcast is all about. Her story of having faith and being obedient to God and fully surrendering to his plans for her life and really just letting go. And then the fruit that came from that through Annika, that's really what this podcast is about. Annika has her own story started, and part of her story is in this. But really, we have to start with Kirsti. So that's where we're going to start, is with mom, Kirsti. So Kirsti is like a Midwest gal. She is the oldest of 3 children. She has 2 younger brothers, and she grew up on a family farm. Here's Kirsti.
I grew up in a Christian home. When I was born, my parents lived in Iowa on a family farm. But when I was 3, we moved to Topeka, Kansas. And we attended a church called Topeka Bible Church. And very solid Bible teaching church.
I started going to Topeka Bible Church. TBC is its abbreviation, but before she could even remember, a children's worker in their children's church told her mom.
My mom told me that when we were attending TBC during kids' church, after kids' church one Sunday, the worker told my mom that I had become a Christian. I don't remember that, but I do remember then when I was in first grade, we moved to Missouri. My parents bought a farm in Missouri, and there we were attending a Baptist church. And I remember telling my dad that I wanted to go down front. I wanted to go down and get baptized. And so I was actually baptized with my parents because they had not grown up in a Baptist church and they had not been baptized as adults. Because my dad was Lutheran, and so he was baptized as an infant. So I got to be baptized with my parents.
And so she's been connected to the Lord since she was really young. And during those years when they were on this farm in Missouri, it would be pretty hard for her family farming. During those years,
we were on the farm for about 8 years, and that was really hard on my mom and dad because we lived on the farm in the late 70s, early 80s, and as a farmer, it was really hard time for farmers during that time.
But one thing that she looks back on and really appreciates from her mom is they were really poor, but her mom was always really dedicated to them listening to Christian music.
The other thing that my mom did is she really encouraged us to listen to Christian music because, like I said, on the farm, we didn't have any money. But she thankfully joined this cassette club. And this was when the Christian music industry was just starting, really, with Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant. And so she was getting the cassettes, and we went to the youth group went to several Christian concerts, and so I grew up only listening to Christian music.
And so her mom had like Christian cassette tapes collection. Like they spent money on these things because they were important. During this time, they moved back to Topeka.
So we eventually moved back to Topeka. We moved back when I was in 8th grade, and I was really thankful that we were able to start going back to Topeka Bible Church. And I mean, I have great memories of growing up in that youth group and in that church. And I have friends still today from that youth group.
Yeah. So she was in 8th grade. They moved back to Topeka because the farm it wasn't really working out. And Kirsti was super excited. You would think at 8th or 9th grade, at that point, you would think you had built your friendships there, but no, like it was just rural, no money. And she still remembers some of these friends from back in first grade, kindergarten, and really this church. So Kirsti was very excited to move back to Topeka, and they start going back to Topeka Bible Church. And she built some really great, strong Christian friendships there at that church. During her early in high school years, she really walked pretty straight and narrow.
So looking back, I was probably really sheltered, but it was okay.
In a lot of good ways, yeah.
And my closest friends were Christian. I was so fortunate to grow up with parents that both attended church, that were both Christians. And I did not grow up in a perfect family by any means. We had our issues of either financial issues or my dad would yell a lot, especially on the weekends. And now as an adult, I realize, like, when my parents were in their teenage years and college years, smoking wasn't bad. And my father was addicted to cigarettes, but he would always stop on the weekends. And then now I realize, it was hard
Withdrawals,
for him. Yes. Yeah. I realize that now.
Yeah.
That's
why did he stop on the weekends?
Because we were all around. So he didn't smoke in front of us. Yes. I realize that now.
She was surrounded by a good youth group and friends that were Christian, and her parents were both churchgoers, not just her mom, but her mom and dad both went to church with her. And so she had a pretty good surrounding.
It was extremely important that I grew up not just in a solid Bible church, but a strong youth group. And we did stuff a lot as a youth group together. And I went back for a reunion, a high school reunion, and everybody was talking about stuff they had done in high school, and I was like, wow, I was oblivious.
Yeah.
I was really oblivious because that's who we hung out with was our youth group. And I remember not even having a curfew in high school because they knew we were with youth group kids.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah.
For how I grew up and the environment that I grew up in.
She recognizes that through all these years, the Lord really spared her from a lot of pain because she did get to know him and walk closely with him since such a young age. But her mom's dad died when she was in high school, and death is really hard no matter what. But that was one of those things that she remembers being a really hard moment for her.
I think one spiritual moment for me, little journey, was in high school. My grandfather passed away, my mom's dad. And that summer, our youth group went to D.C. It was called, it was something 88, but it was in 88. And I had never heard of, the big youth rallies, but it was a really big youth rally in Washington, D.C. And that was just a real spiritual highlight for me of a rededication.
So she went to this youth rally, and your youth years are very formative years, and I still remember summer camp and all that and youth group. And so at that point, she really was able to rededicate her faith and get much closer to the Lord during that time. And again, going through this grandfather's death, you struggle some hard moments, and those moments do shape us and grow us and make us realize we need to rely on this hope that we have, right? And so she rededicates in high school, and again, surrounded by a good church with a lot of really great Bible preaching ministers and good Christian friends.
I was so fortunate to have such solid biblical teaching all through high school, and our pastor also was amazing. And I was a horrible reader, so I always made the excuse that I was a horrible reader, and so I've never had the most amazing quiet time. But I definitely learned more audibly, and I know even today things that I recall biblical training from the years of listening to the teaching that I had. When I was in high school and stuff, there weren't podcasts. There wasn't the internet, and there was not access to everything that we have today. And so that was a key for me.
She just had a good, strong foundation from a really young age. And so when she goes to graduate high school, she really was set on wanting to go to a Christian college because her grandfather, the one that had passed away, he had expressed to her he really wanted her to go to a Christian college.
I was dead set on going to a Christian college
Uh-huh.
because that's what my grandfather told me I should do. That's just what he
really wanted you to.
Yeah. My mother's family can actually trace themselves back to William Brewster, who was the minister on the Mayflower.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thankful not just for my parents and their faith, but just their whole, especially my mother's line of just the strong faith all the way back to the Mayflower. Yeah, and you can see it from generation to generation in that family. And in fact, my grandfather, my mom's dad, his father was a missionary. His mother and father were a missionary in China, and they had to fight their way out of China during the Boxer Rebellion.
So, yeah, her heritage goes all the way back to William Brewster on the Mayflower. And her mom's grandma and grandpa were both missionaries in China during the Boxer Rebellion. So just lots of strong Christians in her family lineage. So she knew her grandpa really wanted her to go to a Christian college, and she did really look into that. But touring colleges back then wasn't really like it is now, and she ended up going to K-State.
Financially, Kansas State made much more sense. It was financially doable, and with a lot of scholarships and stuff.
So she goes to K-State, and in her early years as a young Christian girl in college, she has every intention, every good old Christian gal.
My intent, my plan for my life was going to be married and have 3 children by the time I was 30. And I mean, I dated some, but I never really dated anybody super serious. I still, to this day, do not fully know why God did not allow me to get married, but it didn't happen.
So that's what, I mean, Kirsti's going to college and she's on this track of getting a degree and things, but really her plan for her own life was to find a husband and get married and have babies, just like mine, and probably a lot like yours. And that's the life, right? And so she planned on that. She gets in college and she does date some casually, nothing too super serious. And she's involved in the Baptist Student Union, like BSU, which we still have around today. And back then they had the Campus Crusade. And she was involved in all those things and still stayed really strong in her faith and kept on that path.
I don't know if it was just because of growing up in a Christian family, but my faith has always been really strong and really important. And God protected me from bad choices. I mean, I have not led the perfect life by any means, but God has graciously allowed me to not fall into, I mean, I've never been drunk. It's not that I haven't ever drank, but that I am very thankful that I became a Christian at a young age, and those kinds of struggles aren't the struggles that I've had to have. My mother was 69 when she passed away. So I've had other struggles in life.
She kept a lot of those really strong Christian friends from high school and then made some new ones in college.
One of my best friends still today, Annika, calls Aunt Brenda. When I met her in college, she wasn't a Christian. She was our assistant hall director, so she was in grad school. And my roommate and I were on student council, and she advised student council. So my roommate and I got to know Brenda a little bit. And I was really obnoxious. I was an obnoxious sophomore. And I would ask her, if you were to die today, where would you go? And then we would have conversations. And then all of a sudden one day she said, I'm going to go to heaven. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? And she explained why. And then when she left K-State, she was like, we probably won't keep in touch. I'm not very good at that.
I mean, this was really before cell phones were really a big thing or anything. And Kirsti's like, bet we will stay in touch. They did. Their paths aligned a little later in Kirsti's story. But Brenda becoming a Christian is just one of those pieces along with many others that I think played a huge role in just how Kirsti's story plays out. Because her and Brenda probably wouldn't be friends still if Brenda hadn't become a Christian, because that is just a bond that ties us to our friends, because it's a spiritual family, right? So they became spiritual sisters at that point. And that'll come into play a little bit later. But so during college, actually meeting Brenda and seeing Brenda's role with dorm advisor and that kind of thing, it made Kirsti switch her degree.
I had gone into college with a marketing business folk track in my mind, but then maybe partially through, I decided to go into college student personnel and wanted to work at a college. So then I went to Eastern Illinois, went there for 2 years and got my master's degree, and then went to work at Missouri State. And I was there for 4 years.
And then she decided to take a break from that and come back to Casey, because Missouri State, if you're not from Missouri, Missouri State is about three hours away from Kansas City. Springfield. It's about 3 hours away from Kansas City.
I left the college environment for about 4 years or so because I moved from Missouri State up to Kansas City because I really wanted to be closer to Topeka. And I ended up working for a church because I thought that would be the ideal job. And I quickly realized it wasn't. It was so hard.
If you're not in ministry, that is a whole different thing to work for. So she was coordinating events and working for the singles ministry at this church in Kansas City. And working for a singles ministry has its own, especially when you are single, trying to find someone, that had its own challenges and things.
And ironically, after I stopped working there, that's when a few young men were like, we would have asked you out, but we didn't think it was appropriate.
Because you were leading.
I was like, oh.
That's a perfect time.
Yes.
And Annika was here when she was telling me that, and Annika was like, were they cute? And Kirsti's like, yeah, they were really cute. Like, they were good. But that obviously didn't work out for a reason. So then another fun adventure Kirsti went on. Her brother and her started making board games.
I turned 30 when I was working at the church. My brother and I also did board games during this time in our life. Like, we did Missouri. We did a Kansasopoly, and then we did a Missouriopoly. And then he invented his own game called Oval Office, The Race to be President. And because I was working at the church at the time, we were actually living together. Mm-hmm. He asked me if I would go part-time, and then he would pay all the bills if I would try and sell the game. So I just remember he would write out all these answers to questions and stuff, and I would sit on the sofa and be interviewed by radio people all over the nation. Yeah, because that was part of it, is contacting different radio stations and getting interviewed. So then I left the church and I worked for Salvation Army for a couple of years.
So she did that for a while, and then she ended up working for the Salvation Army for a while. She really struggled because at this point she's entering her 30s. Okay. And that's when she really struggled, because you remember, from 18, 19 years old, the goal, get married, have 3 kids by the time you're 30. And here she is, and she's 30. And she's not married. She's not even close.
Turning 30 was much harder than turning 40. It was I think in some ways I just had to let go. Like, it was a little depressing because what I had planned for my life was not happening at all. And then my youngest brother, had already gotten married. And my brother Bob, that I was living with, I was so mad, in a funny way mad, because after I stopped working at the church in Kansas City, we started attending more of a citywide type of a singles group. And Bob went with me one time, and he's like, oh, I think you should go and get established, and then I'll come. So I did. And then the first time that he shows up, he meets his wife. I was like, oh, whatever. But it's good. It's good for them.
The first time her brother comes with her, he meets his future wife. And so she laughs now. She says she was mad, but in a funny way, because she was living with her brother. So he finds his bride, and she knows she's on the boot. And she just is struggling with, why isn't this working out for me?
Yeah.
Why am I not finding, she's remained true to what the Lord has asked of her in her life. And she's just like, why isn't this happening for me? It's happening for everyone else. Why isn't it happening for me? Like, we all have struggles and they just look different sometimes. Yeah. So she thankfully didn't struggle with addiction to anything or hurt from making poor choices, but she struggled with, why isn't my life going the way I thought it would? I thought this is what God would want for my life, and it's not happening.
I remember I felt exhausted a lot because I felt like every time I went to anything, I had to be on. And it was like, could I meet him now? Yeah. It was like the pressure that I had put on myself. Yeah. I mean, nobody had really put that pressure on me. I know that my parents both, they wanted me to be married. I want Annika to get married if that's the right thing. I think you want that for your children. Mm-hmm. And so it always made me sad being the only girl that my dad never got to walk me down the aisle. Yeah. So that makes me sad. Yeah. But I don't regret it.
So she, at this point, she's ready to go back into the university world. She wants to get back into the college setting. And a job opened up here at UCM in Warrensburg, which is for the listeners, where we live. So the University of Central Missouri, it might have still been CMSU at that point, Central Missouri State University. And she took this job and she bought a house in Blue Springs because, again, in her mind, she needed to be closer to the city, more options, more opportunity for finding the one. And so that's still in her plan. She's still pretty much thinking that she'll eventually find somebody. And so she buys a house in Blue Springs and she starts working at the college here in Warrensburg, which is about probably a 45-minute drive from Blue Springs. So she had a decent commute and she's still on this path of waiting for the right one and making sure that there's opportunities for that to happen. Yeah. So Kirsti gets to around 36 years old, and she just gets this new kind of conviction on her heart.
And at that time on K-Love, there was a couple of DJs that had just recently adopted, and it just felt like everywhere I turned, I was being faced with an adoption story. When the thought first started entering my mind, I'm like, there's no way I can do this. Seriously? This is really something that I could do? And so I did. I just started praying about it and thinking about it. And I'm like, this is crazy. Can I really do this?
That is not something she ever considered for herself. This is not something she ever planned. And she just takes it to the Lord. She just decides to start praying about it. And the more she prays about it, the more she's feeling, I think I'm supposed to adopt. Yeah. It's just like, what? Oh. Me? This mid-30s single woman. Yeah. And early on in that process of praying for it, she knew that with this, she was coming to a point between her and God that if she was going to commit to this process, that she was going to have to let go of this other path and this other plan that she had for herself.
I had to come to a point and say, okay, Lord, if I'm going to do this, I have to go into this with the assumption that I will never get married. I can't go into this expecting, okay, now that I've adopted, now you're going to bring him into my life. Because then I'm just going to be disappointed. Or I can't expect that, okay, he's going to bring a man into my life and now everything's going to be perfect and he's going to provide. It needs to be something that I feel like God wants me to do and that God's going to sustain us.
Like, okay, God, I don't need to find a husband to get me through this. This is something you're leading me through.
You will get
me through it. You will be my partner in this. And because she knew, and I think that's why I was like, I got to go back to this. We got to talk about Kirsti's state of mind and her spiritual health at this point, because to say I'm giving up every plan and path that I've had for my own life and surrendering to this plan that you're laying, convicting me of, Lord, that is full surrender. To let go of, I mean, as women, as girls at one point, that's what you think. You think, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to have my own family. And that path doesn't always play out for all of us.
Right. That's not for everyone.
And even when it does play out, it's not always perfect, right? There's always challenges with everything. But Kirsti is 36 at this point, and she finally gets to a point of saying, I'm okay with letting go of this. I trust you, and I'm going to move forward with this. But I know moving forward with this means I'm going to let go of my own ambition, my own desires, really, of having this picture of what I thought my life would look like. So I think that's huge. And what I really love about Kirsti's story, because we just came from Carly's story, where Carly now is very passionate about the nuclear family and having a mom and a dad. And so when Kirsti starts, I had no idea Kirsti was a single mom when I met her, or even when she came into my home to sit and talk to me. But what I love about Kirsti's story is she totally recognizes what the Bible says about that nuclear home and a man and a wife and the design for marriage and families. And that was not something that she just ignored. She prayed fervently about that, and she saw lots of wisdom in her life.
I talked to one of my best friends, Brenda. I talked to my brother, Bob, and just was getting their feel for it. That was one of the reasons that I talked to my brother, Bob, at the very beginning, because I knew that I wanted to adopt a girl, but I also knew that she would need a male figure. So that was really important to me. And then I went home at Christmas and I talked to my parents, and they were very sweet. They were nervous for me, and which now as a parent, I can completely understand that, okay, what does this mean for you? How are you going to handle this? And they were very supportive, but they also were wanting to protect me.
Her parents were worried. They were concerned for her, as any parent would be, just the challenges that would come with it, but they were ultimately supportive. One of her brothers and his wife were not supportive of it at first.
My brother and sister-in-law strongly believed that I shouldn't. They were not excited about it at all. He had some questions about it, and along those lines of the biblical definition of a family. But I am very thankful that God showed them that it was okay. And he did that just probably a few months before I got her referral. He actually reached out to Focus on the Family and asked them. And their response to him was, adoption is not about you. It's not about the person that is adopting. It's about the person that's being adopted. And that is the focus.
It took their own spiritual conviction and praying and seeking their own counseling over it to be supportive in it, because we are told, it should be a husband and a wife, and there's lots of reasons God designs it that way. But Kirsti's this was a different calling. This was not just doing it to do. This was the Lord laying this out for her life. And the final kind of, am I really going to move forward with this, was she went to ask her pastor, the one that had been her very strong biblical teacher most of her life. And she was nervous about that.
And I was, at that point, was so excited about the possibility that I was really nervous to talk to him, because I was like, what is he going to say? Because I know I know what the Bible says. I know the Bible says that the best situation, what God ordained, is a man and a wife for a family. And I fully understand that, but I really just felt like God was leading me this direction. And I was processing a lot of things, like silly things like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to buy clothes at this store anymore. Or, just how it financially changed things. And, I guess probably things that a lot of people think when they are ready to start a family. But so I met with Pastor Jim, and I barely got the words out of my mouth of, I'm thinking about adopting, where he leaned forward and was like, yes, you have to do this. And I was so relieved. I was so relieved.
What was he had just felt that?
Yeah, he was, yes.
You were called to do.
Yes.
that was such a relief for her because she knew what the Lord was really calling her to do, and to have that support of people in her life that were spiritual leaders meant a lot. So Kirsti did not take this lightly. This wasn't just, I'm a single woman and I haven't found a man, so I want a kid. This was not her plan. This isn't anything she ever considered. This was something the Lord was calling her to do. And she was obedient in that. So Kirsti, in this time period of battling, like, how am I going to do this alone and all these things, Brenda, her friend, Aunt Brenda ends up offering for her to come live with her here in Warrensburg so that she can have some extra support at home.
So I was communing to work. And then when I decided to adopt, I ended up moving in with Brenda. And that is part of how I was able to save so much money. And I put my house on the market. But my house did not. It was on the market. I rented it to somebody, which was a horrible thing. Like, God even provided through all of that because I lost money in that ordeal. But yet he still provided all of it.
And so it was a good option for her to live with not Aunt Brenda at the time. She was just her best friend, Brenda. But she struggled with that too. And I would too, as a single Christian woman. And we're talking the 2000s at this point. You have gay marriage is very much more culturally accepted.
Well, I work at a university.
Yeah.
And people made comments, but people made comments before that because I was in my 30s. Yeah. So what's wrong with you? Why aren't you married? So that was something that I really wrestled with.
And she struggled with what people would think of her living with a woman and adopting. And that was hard for her. But ultimately, she had to choose what was going to be best for this new child she was bringing home and what was going to be best for her. And I can't imagine just the confliction of dealing with people and their thoughts, but also wanting to honor God and wanting there to be no confusion of her life and that she was living her life for Christ. So she struggled with that, but ultimately ended up with Brenda, and that was huge. That played out in a big way.
And it costs $50,000 to adopt, and I'm a single person with a single income. Yeah. And to this day, I still do not know how he provided all of that $50,000. Like, I really don't know how it all came together, but it did.
So $50,000 to adopt, and a lot of people in her community were supportive. They put on fundraisers for her. She said she had like 6 or 7 baby showers by the time she did adopt, and lots of people raising money to help her. And it took years to get this all in place. She waited for 2 or 3 years. And at the time that she got to the top of the list for adoption in Russia, a little girl named Mila, which is our Annika.
So by then, I knew I was at the top of the list. And that's how it works in Russia, is you're on a waiting list until you get to the top of the list. I got her referral in November.
In Russia, in order to be placed up for adoption, you had to be in the orphanage for like 9 months before you could be placed for adoption outside of the country. But Kirsti was at the top of the list right at the time, divinely at the time that Annika made it onto this list. Next time on Spilling.
And then she left without me and never came back. I shouldn't be alive.
The neighbors had called the police because they heard a baby crying. And then when the police came and got her, they could not locate any relatives.
My future is 6 feet under.
Satan did not want her to be adopted. There were so many things that happened along the way that were like, you're kidding me, this obstacle? In Russia, they had diagnosed her with pulmonary hypertension, which is fatal.
No hope to be saved. I shouldn't be alive.
It really is an example of it wasn't within my power. I mean, God wanted her to be adopted.
Yeah.
Clearly. God wanted her here.
But I typical child.
But looking back, that pediatrician knew that something was wrong. The surgeon that invented the surgery is the one that actually operated on her. And that surgery was even harder to recover from than the open heart surgery. It was really hard.
My doctors told me that with this thing that I have, I shouldn't be able to sing. I shouldn't be able to sing. I should be on oxygen in my mid-20s. To fight every diagnosis. I would hide in the bathrooms until the hallways cleared out so I could go to that room and no one would see me. The lead guy for We the Kingdom, Ed, looks at me and goes, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but will you sing with Katie Nicole? And as close as it came, I can stand here and say, there's a reason that I have a story like I do, and there's not a mistake that it's like that. Like, it's not, because God doesn't make mistakes.
Join us next week for part 2 of Kirsti and Annika's story, where we'll dive deep into the struggles that Kirsti faced through the adoption process, Annika's life, and the battles that she's already faced in her short 15 years, and the supernatural wonders that the Lord has already done in their life. If you don't want to miss out on anything spilling from us, make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you are listening. Download the episode and leave us a review. It really helps us out. You can follow us on all the socials. Our link tree is in the show notes. We want to thank our spillers for sharing their tea with us. Remember that we only share spiritual tea here at the Spiritual Tea Company, and we define that as truth that enlightens others and affirms the Holy Spirit in us. We hope this encouraged you today to spill out your truth onto others of how God is working in your life. To learn more about being a spiller or living a more spill-worthy life, go to our website, spiritualtea.co. That's spiritualtea.co. And don't forget to spill out this episode by sharing it with someone you feel God wants to touch with this story. Stay filled, friends.